I love homebrew rules, and I adore all the lovely ideas that people float around. In general, a lot of the conversation surrounding homebrew rules online is a very positive one, and while that's nice, I feel like it leaves less than thorough thought. There can be lots of praise and excitement surrounding homebrew rules online, even though those rules might be kind of half-baked or just not universally applicable, because every single table is going to have unique needs and want unique rules. So I'm going to give you some criticism, not as a takedown or to tell you that you shouldn't be using these rules, but just as a sort of devil's advocate to give you both sides of the coin before you just throw these things in. The first rule on the list goes by a handful of names. It just depends on who you ask, but it's very commonly called either crunchy crits or brutal criticals. Why people would choose to use a name that's already used for an existing barbarian mechanic that alters criticals in a completely different way it's fucking beyond me, but nobody seems to ask for my opinion before they make their D&D videos from several years ago. This homebrew changes the rule of critical damage to, instead of doubling the number of dice you roll, you instead just roll the regular dice, but then you add the maximum value that those dice could possibly roll to the attack's damage as well. So to give an example that should clear things up a bit if you're still confused, let's say you use a great axe. Normally, a great axe rolls 1d12. With the standard crit damage rules, if you crit, you would roll 2d12. With this homebrew rule, you instead just roll your normal 1d12, and then you add an extra 12 damage to it, because 12 is the highest number you can roll on a 12-sided die. I personally don't like this rule, and I doubt I'll ever end up using it, but I do think it has its place at certain tables. I just think when people bring it up, they just kind of sweep a lot of its flaws under the rug. While brutal criticals can make your crits more exciting and rewarding when you land them, or more tense and devastating when the bad guys land them on you, there's also like a countless number of stories where people complain about how their big evil bad guy died in one round due to the players getting a couple lucky crits, or there was a TPK in an easy encounter because the enemies did the same thing. If you don't like that kind of thing happening, this rule makes that possibility even higher, because brutal criticals do a lot more damage than your regular crit rule. Crits are a totally random, well, mostly random, and mostly uncontrollable part of the game. If you make them do even more damage, then they're going to have an even bigger ability to swing a fight in one side's favor, while being no more of a strategic decision. There are some people who hate random chance being able to play such a big role in determining a fight, or even worse, somebody's death. This exact same rule that can make things feel more rewarding and epic and really cool and swingy can also just make things frustrating some of the time. This rule is also an insane amount of damage once you start calculating for things that get to roll lots of dice when they hit. When people give examples for crunchy crits, they usually do what I did, and they use just a basic weapons damage die. Getting to have the maximum of your basic weapon die added like a d10 or a d12 is pretty sweet. But once you start getting into things like a rogue's sneak attack, paladins who can choose to divine smite after they crit, frost giants who roll 3d12 per hit, it starts to become a lot of damage. This takes the mechanic from adding that extra 12 damage to each crit to all of a sudden adding 24, 30, or even more damage to every single attack. It can be a big number very, very quickly. To sum it up quickly, critical hits are already able to really swing a fight unpredictably, with no player input. I think you should be careful before you allow them to do that even more so. You can, just, think it through. People often add this rule to avoid that feel-bad moment of rolling really low on your crit damage, because that moment does suck. And brutal criticals make it so that every single crit is going to be big and going to hurt. And if that makes people happy at your table, great reason to add this to your game. But do consider that you can already end up rolling low on regular weapon damage, and that's kind of a feel-bad moment. A lot of times when you roll really low on your dice, it sort of sucks. Random chance will always be a part of this game. You can always end up rolling high, and you can always end up rolling low, and a big part of the fun of rolling really high is because there is that risk of rolling really low. If you try too hard to remove all those feel-bad moments in D&D, you end up hurting the fun of D&D in the process. I've tried, and my games ended up sucking. Ow. Fuck. Another rule that isn't actually homebrewed, it's an optional rule in the DMG, is called massive damage. And no, that wasn't for the bit. I did not just take massive damage, I just fucking hit myself in the head for no reason. The way that this rule works is that if you take massive damage, something equal to or greater than half of your hit points, you suffer some additional debilitating effect. And I fucking hate this rule. Now, I've never actually played with it, and maybe if I did, I would see how I'm wrong, but it sounds awful. I don't know, man. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Jacob from XP to level 3 has brought it up in all 3 of his homebrew rule videos, so like, he's a smart D&D guy. Maybe there's something there that I'm missing, but I don't see it. Whenever you take massive damage, you have to make a con save. If you fail, you roll on the system shock table and suffer some kind of effect. The idea behind this mechanic is to create just that, system shock. It's that kind of moment when a character takes such a big hit from something that they're left rolling around in pain, stunned from the experience, or just frozen in shock. I understand why people want something like that in D&D, I really, really do. D&D games exist in a kind of tug-of-war between storytelling mechanics and good and balanced gameplay mechanics, and everyone's ideal line for this tension to fall on is gonna be in a different place. But I think we all want to be able to maintain verisimilitude in our stories while having a fair game. That's pretty universal. I think the massive damage mechanic focuses way too much on this idea of a realistic reaction to damage that just pulls too far away from fun gameplay, in my opinion. Losing half of your hit points in one strike is no small feat, and if you're up against something that can do that to you, I don't think most parties are going to need that situation to be even worse. To put things into a better perspective, the Dungeon Master's Guide System Shock table has you roll a d10, and on a 1 to a 3, you fall down to 0 hit points. The attack just gets boosted to one-shot you. Imagine starting a combat against a dragon and it goes first and gets to use its breath weapon, and like a couple people have to roll on this table, and there's just a 30% chance that they're immediately downed. That is an absolute worst case scenario. I am kind of exaggerating here, but it's still a scenario that you're opening yourself up to having. I cannot think, and I am searching my brain, for some kind of situation where having a big attack that's already doing a lot of damage gets boosted to one-shot me, and I'm still having fun. Even if you roll higher on the table and you get some of the less bad effects, they're still just, well, like I just said, they're not very fun. I run very narrative-focused games that are similar to a lot of the popular D&D shows like Critical Role and Dimension 20. And when I'm running combat as a DM, my primary goal is to both create and then manipulate tension. The more tense a situation is, the more careful and strategic players have to be with their moves. For all the various players I've ever ran for, if one of them got chunked for half their health, that already lights a fire under their ass and it makes a moment tense. Holy fuck, you just lost half your health. I have never once run a game for a player who needed to be stunned or something like that on top of it, just to make it an impactful moment. In addition, it's hard to maintain tension if players can't act on it. If somebody gets knocked out or stunned to where they just don't get to do anything, they're no longer asking things like, what do I need to do to win this fight? Or trying to figure out how to be more strategic. Instead, it just rips the game out of their hands, smacks them upside the head, and keeps them from doing anything, which can be really frustrating for players. And Jacob already made a video complaining about the stun condition and why it's stupid and why nobody should use it. And buddy, I have followed your lead like a sheep in your flock, and you are my shepherd. I have trusted you thus far, but I don't understand where we're going anymore, buddy. Why the fuck do you use this rule? Now, I want to be very clear and make it so that you don't think I'm saying debuffing your characters is always bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. I do have issues with the stun condition and similar things to it, but that's a rant for a whole different video. I actually love debuffing players, and I think it can make for insanely fun fights. The issue that I have in this particular situation is that you're adding a debuff onto something that's doing a ton of damage with no drawbacks. You're making the thing they're fighting more powerful, even though the reason it's getting buffed is because it's already really powerful to begin with. In short, I feel like doing damage is its own reward. Another little side issue that I have with massive damage is that there is no damage minimum for this thing to kick in as written. People usually talk about larger level parties getting hit by a dragon's breath and stuff like that, but there's no minimum requirement for this thing to kick in. So it is very, very dangerous for low-level parties. If you're like level 1, 2, 3, your health is still in the single or barely into the double digits, this is no longer a mechanic that makes massive attacks come down and shock a party. This makes it so a guy named Paul with a beatstick is damn near guaranteed to fuck up your wizard. It isn't impossible that a person with a club could kill somebody in one swing. That's not unrealistic. But a lot of people don't play D&D to die to one shot because realism is cool. If your group does, that's awesome. But just, make sure your group does before you go adding in this rule as is. To its benefit, though, massive damage has a lot of different parts of it that you can fuck around with to try to make it into your own thing. Lots of people have created their own system shock tables or come up with ideas for just single mechanics. You could add a damage minimum so it's not as deadly to early parties. There's lots to tweak around with and to look up, so, mess around with it and turn it into something of your own. I don't know how Jacob does this shit on the floor. This is not comfortable, but I'm under, the camera's above my crotch. I'm being straddled by a DSLR. Jump cut to back to the couch. Lastly, I'm going to cover critical success and critical fail tables, full of extra bonuses for an already good thing and extra detriments for an already bad thing. You see, I did this really creative thing with my script, in which ties into the other 2 points, because it's, I'm really smart. As you may or may not be able to guess, my biggest issue with these rules is that critical successes are already good enough and critical fails are already bad enough. If you want those things to be bigger and more extreme in each direction, you can do that. You absolutely can. I just want you to be sure that you understand the role that crits are already having in your games before you go fucking with them. A lot of the homebrew tables that people make for this shit get really ridiculous and really out of hand really, really fast. Like, rolling a 1 has a chance to make your weapon break, which can just make people completely useless for the rest of a fight, or you can chop off your own arm. And critical successes will give you things like, you deal quadruple damage, and you also lop off the dude's head, and his head goes flying towards the next guy, and it hits into his chest where it explodes, and it deals 20d20 head damage. Avoid those tables. Those tables are poorly designed, but even smaller effects can still be a little overbearing, and even little things like cosmetic changes can sometimes backfire. Not all players like when you change stuff about their character. And permanent injuries is its own slew of issues, because 5th edition isn't built to accommodate some kind of permanent injury, so you have to figure out every single little rule about how this is going to affect that person going forward. It's difficult to get into specifics when we're talking about something that surrounds tables, because every single person's individual homebrewed table is going to have its own unique set of things that all individually have to be correctly balanced for their game. That's a big part of why I find them unappealing. You have to balance a whole table's worth of effects. And on top of the crit, you have this extra random element of rolling, and certain things on that table are going to be worse or better in certain situations, so it's just even more random chance in a game, and I don't know, if you can't tell, I really dislike them. Sometimes people will just come up with a singular mechanic that happens when you crit fail, and one that I've seen crop up a lot is the idea that a crit fail provokes an attack of opportunity. Now I want to dive into this one a little bit further, just because I do think it gets discussed as a nice alternative to critical fail tables, and I think it seems more reasonable on the surface, but I don't think it actually really is. First things first, I think it disproportionately imbalances melee characters for no real reason. The more attacks you make per turn, the greater your chances of rolling a 1. Spellcasters often aren't really rolling attacks at all, and when they do, and other ranged characters, they're usually just that, at a range where they can't provoke an attack of opportunity. Fighters, paladins, and the like, they need to be making plenty of attacks each turn to get through encounters, or at the very least have fun in them. That's what the class is designed to do, swing your sword, do the thing. Also, in the games I play in and run, attacks of opportunity are not very common, and I think it's because attacks of opportunity are determined by the creature getting attacked. They're the ones that give the decision to allow other things to have an attack of opportunity against them by not choosing to disengage. It's a little bit of a tactical decision. There is a choice being made, and it creates a sort of risk-reward scenario. If a player's surrounded by 4 creatures, they're probably not gonna choose to provoke attacks of opportunity on their turn. It's pretty unlikely, because taking 4 attacks will seriously fuck you up. Provoking attacks of opportunity on a crit fail, though, is not a decision you get to make. It's just something that happens to you. And if you're surrounded like that, this can seriously fuck you up, all because you rolled a 1. because you're trying to attack these creatures. You're trying to do the thing, your class, the thing the entire game is designed for you to be doing. With every single swing to try and progress the fight in your favor, there's a 5% chance you progress it for the enemy. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably just going to apply to your frontliners. I think people often really underestimate how frequently people roll 1s and 20s. 5% does not sound like a lot on paper, but it really adds up with all the d20s people roll in a session. 10% of all rolls, statistically, are going to be on one of these two extremes. That's 1 in 10 rolls. It's really not all that rare. If you want to add in additional crit rules and still maintain verisimilitude and fun and balanced gameplay, I think all these rules need a lot of tweaking and very, very careful consideration. It's easy to make crit benefits and detriments way too powerful, so, be careful with this, playtest some stuff, and work with your group to find the right amount of oomph that these crit fail and success tables should have. But if your group doesn't actually care about shit like that and you think these tables are hilarious, then go buck wild. Have fun. Do quadruple damage. Chop off your own damn legs. Play the game your way. I just wanted to provide you with some alternate viewpoints so you can make sure you're adding in rules that your table loves, specifically your table. And you're not just tossing in rules that YouTubers and Redditors brought up because they think they're cool even though they might not have playtested them much. Well, I think that just about does it for your friendly neighborhood devil's advocate. Have fun out there.